Welcome, everyone. I am so very excited to be able to host Dr. Vermelle Greene today. So many of you are excited to hear what she has to say, and we just have a million things to talk about. We've been visiting for a little while, and we have lots of things to share with you. Let me say at the outset that I will be monitoring the Q&A. You can ask questions there, and I'll ask those of Dr. Greene. We've got an hour to spend together. Well over 600 of you asked questions, so we're going to get started right away. Rather than do this less than eloquently, I'm going to ask Dr. Greene to introduce herself. My name is Gretchen Roe. I'm the Community Relations Coordinator for Demme Learning, and it's my very great pleasure to have Dr. Greene join me today. Vermelle, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right, Vermelle Greene here, lifelong educator. I started teaching in 1974. So those of you who are really good in math, that makes me about 52. No, I'm going to claim it. I turned the big 7-0 in January, and I'm proud to say it. Lifelong educator. And when I started out in high school, I kept seeing our children having issues, especially when it came to reading. I taught biology, and I remember telling students who couldn't pronounce hermaphroditic or chordata or arthropoda, I would say to them, sound it out. And they would look at me and say, sound it out, what does that mean? So, in high school, we high school teachers, we just blame the middle school teachers, what are they teaching? Why can't these children read? And then when I was at middle school level, what's the matter with the elementary school teachers? Why aren't they teaching these children? So it wasn't until I was at the elementary school grades as an assistant principal at that point that I began to see some of the issues, especially with our boys. I was able to retire, still with my senses about me and my health. And I went to my pastor, and I knew he wanted to start a school. So I said, Pastor, how about this? How about a school for boys? He was intrigued. I was excited. I went to the State Department of Education because I wanted to see what other schools are out there so I could go visit. And so I went to them and I said, I'm looking for another school, kindergarten to grade 8 for boys, that teaches boys the way they learn best, Christian school. And I was told, well, there are none. And I thought, you mean in our county? She says, no, there are none in the state. Now, this was 2001. And at that time, there were no Christian school for boys, K through 8. There were secular school for boys and some Catholic schools for high school boys, but none to teach the little boys what they needed to do. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to make a difference in their lives because I saw the issues they were having. So we started the day before 9/11, September 10th, 2001. I started with one student. About 4 months later, my enrollment doubled. I then had 2. And from then, it continued to grow where we were always small though, but we were in existence for about 14 years. And during that time, we were able to make a difference, a huge difference in the lives of a lot of boys, teaching them what they needed to be as young men. And I couldn't do it. So I brought in mentors and people from our church and from the community to teach them that. We could teach them how to read and write, but we couldn't teach them how to be men. But we really made a difference. And I just, thank God for that opportunity to have been part of their lives. And that's what got me started on this whole journey with boys, seeing just where they are now, even worse than where they were when we started the school over 20 years ago, at the bottom of test scores and at the top of suspension rates. And with parents getting those phone calls over and over again, Johnny won't sit still, Johnny won't pay attention. He's always touching things. He never brings in his homework. He's disorganized. And many times those teachers are basing the boys' behavior upon what they see in the girls. They're almost treating the boys like they're defective girls. when COVID locked us down in 2020, as many people I found out did, we said, well, I'm going to write a book. And so my book, my COVID book, I call it, was one that I wanted to dedicate to all those teachers who perhaps just didn't know, like I didn't know, that boys learn differently than girls. So I wrote a book, Please Teach Me Like I'm a Boy. I wanted it not to be a sit down, read it from cover to cover. I wanted it to be a resource book, not just for teachers, but for parents, because our parents have to be the ones to advocate for their sons. Unfortunately, our boys don't have that many advocates out there in academia or in society. So it's going to have to be the parents, especially you mama bears and papa bears, but especially you mama bears. When you see your sons not getting a fair shake, not being told that he's intelligent, that he's smart, that he's not a troublemaker, all those messages, that negative messages that are being poured into our sons' lives, that we have to step up and say no. And that's where the Boys Initiative comes about. Gretchen, should I talk about that as well?
Sure, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but one of the things that I wanted to make sure that parents knew is we have had a joyful journey together in a little over a year now. Just before Dr. Greene published her book, somehow we got on the phone together and I got a caroled copy of that book, and I will tell you all that it was worth the time. I sent it on to a colleague who's the father of boys. And here's what I want you all to know. Dr. Greene has her experience in the public education world and seeing what is happening to boys. And 2020 changed many of our lives in the affirmative way because we were able to bring our children home and see what they weren't learning and to be able to meet the challenge of helping those kids learn. And so we have more homeschoolers than ever. Homeschooling has come into its own in a tremendous way. And here's what I want you as parents to tuck in the back of your head, and I want you to think about from now to the end of our time together. And that is, you are in the perfect position to change the story of every boy in your household and with whom you have influence from now going forward. Because we're going to give you some brilliant ideas, some food for thought, and some ways to think about the fact that boys do life differently. And if you have boys, you know that is the truth. I have 3 of them. I just got to spend the weekend with them. And even as adults, 5 of my 6 kids are grown adults now. And watching them and how they relate to the world, it's an entirely different experience. It's a joyful one. It's a precious one. But what we want to do is we want every parent who is educating their own child to take away the idea that you have a very special privilege to change the outcome for your student. And so now I'd like Dr. Greene to talk a little bit about the Boys Initiative, if you will.
Sure. Back again in 2020, shut up in my house, I say, okay, the book has now been written. What else can I do? And I subscribe to a listserv of a group of gentlemen and women called the White House Council on Boys and Men. And I've been part of their listserv for a number of years. I got an email from a gentleman who said that he was looking for someone to help him with his nonprofit organization, one of which was the Boys Initiative. He had several nonprofits. So I said, oh, well, I could go and help. I'd be willing to do that. Where am I going to go? So I contacted him. We talked. We had a meeting of the minds, like hearts. And so he asked me to come on board. And at the time, I thought I was going to be helping someone, but I quickly learned that I was it. He even gave me a title, the executive director of the Boys Initiative. And he said my job was to kind of resurrect the initiative from a kind of, for lack of a better term, it's deadness. It had been in existence for at that time, close to about 10 years, but it never really had thrived and taken off. So I was able to come on board and have made it my business to make the Boys Initiative into an organization that raises awareness of the issues that are out there, because it's not talked about. Mainstream media doesn't talk about the fact that our boys are at the bottom of test scores and at the top of suspension rates, that our boys' mental health is a lot worse than our girls, that male suicide rates are double and triple that of our girls. And it's not just a national problem, just in the United States, it's a worldwide problem. You know, we get articles from countries, Ireland, Jamaica, India, and the boys are underachieving in many countries, and not just in America. But with our focus on our boys here in America, we're seeing the achievement gap getting larger and larger and larger, the college attendance rate getting larger. So the Boys Initiative is sounding the clarion call, and we want to recruit like-minded parents, especially of sons or teachers of sons or pastors or clergymen or faith leaders of boys, dads of boys, to say, come on, let's join together. Let's begin to be the advocates, the kind of advocates that the girls had back in the 1980s, where they had the curriculum changed, scholarships established, whole programs written just to help the girls in the STEM areas. We need to stand up and say, look, we need to help our boys. And we want our parents, especially our parents, to come along beside us in this fight, in this struggle.
So that website is theboysinitiative.org, and you'll get more information in the follow-up email that comes to you as the post for this event. And so many of you had so many questions, but you know, they fell into some categories. So let me say first, before we get into your questions, that any of you who have information that you ask a very specific question, our team will be following up with you with regard to those questions within the next week. In the next 24 to 36 hours, we'll be sending out this recording so that you all will have that. And anything that we mentioned today, as far as like the URL for the Boys Initiative, will be included in that information. This will also be posted onto our blog. You can find that at demmelearning.com/blog. And I want you all to know that any webinar that we have produced in the last 6 months is posted on that blog. And many of you ask questions, particularly about teaching boys and mathematics. And if we know anything here at Demme Learning, that's a subject that we're well versed in. There is a plethora of information about making that happen from our blog, from our webinars that we have produced in the past. So some of you are going to say, well, you didn't address my question today because I asked questions specifically about mathematics and boys. And that's not really true. We're just going to spend our time here as productively as possible, and we'll refer you to other resources for that. Let me say as an aside, one thing that I want parents to bear in mind, regardless of whose math curricula you use, I want you to know that your child has an attention span of their age plus 2 to 3 minutes for new information. So those of you who perhaps found your way to homeschooling kind of accidentally and thought that homeschooling should look like school need to recognize that an hour of mathematics is not the most productive time that you can spend. Beyond about 15, maybe 20 minutes, your student is hanging in there with you because they're being obedient, not because it's their best academic experience. And if you want some more details on that, I'm going to refer you to our webinars and to our blog. Now, Dr. Greene, I'd like to really step into, and I'm going to go back and forth between Vermelle and Dr. Greene and Dr. Vermelle and all those things. Because I've called you all those things since we've known each other.
Sister.
But I would like to do, first, I would like for you to talk about the subject that came up more frequently than anything else and that's ADHD or ADD. So can we dive in with the big one?
Absolutely, absolutely. 1 out of 10 American children have been diagnosed with ADHD. And, you know, it is real. It is real, but I believe that it has been overdiagnosed and definitely overprescribed. But of that 1 in 10 children, twice as many are our boys. And ADHD and ADD, and parents probably know the difference. ADD is without the hyperactivity. That's what my son was diagnosed with having, where, he wasn't necessarily hyper, but he would, his pencil would become a spaceship, as he was writing, or he would just kind of sit and get into what Mark Gungor calls his nothing box. But then you have the ADHD with the hyperactivity, the restlessness, the impulsivity, the aggressiveness is all tied in. And also, there is an excellent book called The Boy Crisis, and I suggest that every parent get that book. And he talks about the fact that ADHD is kind of, or the attention deficit disorder. A lot of times people think, oh, attention deficit, it's like a budget deficit. There's not enough, or you have a thyroid deficit. But really, it's not that you don't have enough attention. You almost have too much attention, and that you notice everything. So ADHD is more or less the inability to focus your attention on one thing for any length of time. And there are a number of causes, and it manifests differently in different individuals, depending upon just how they are made up chemically and emotionally and their environment. In some cases, an ADHD child might become very, what we call ODD. Everything, they become a perfectionist and they want to be the best at everything. And then you have some kids who are ADHD and all they want to do is just flitter around and play and roll and jump. So it really depends on just what the psyche of that child is. So when you have a child who has an inability to be able to shift their focus from stimulating activities, like the video games, very stimulating, to less stimulating activities, that's when you come into the issues. Because for many children, sitting and reading and writing is not very stimulating. The ADHD children crave something called dopamine. Dopamine is a hormone that, well, we call it the pleasure hormone or the motivational hormone. And that is what makes us want to learn, want to achieve. It motivates us. Dopamine helps us to get up out the bed in the morning to go to work. But when you have a child who has become almost addicted to dopamine, they need that dopamine. They will seek out different ways to get to stir up that dopamine in their lives. And that could be either through video games. It's very highly stimulating and it revs up that dopamine. Unfortunately, there are some negative ways that they can rev up that dopamine too, through becoming argumentative or picking fights, arguing or being defiant. That kind of revs up their dopamine as well. So when you have a child, when you are trying to teach him and he's looking at, I need something exciting, this isn't exciting. The parent is like pulling their heads, I'm not a video game. I can't move and turn colors and jump over fences. Parents, I would strongly suggest, first of all, if you have an ADHD child, boy or girl, one of the first things you should look at is their diet. Because many times the diet can be a trigger and it inhibits dopamine function. In fact, Warren Farrell says a better term for ADHD would be inhibited dopamine function, that their dopamine isn't at normal levels. And that can be affected by diet. It can be affected by lack of exercise. It can be affected by lack of sleep. It can be affected by lack of exercise. So when a child has not gotten sufficient dopamine created by his own body, then it really behooves the parent to look at some of those other items. Take your child to the doctor, and the doctor might ask some questions about, what's he eating? Could he have an allergy to? And I'm saying he because so many of our children who exhibit this are our boys. He might have an allergy to gluten or an allergy to other processed food or other chemicals that's in the food. So diet should be one of the first things that you look at. When you are trying to educate that ADHD child, it is best to do that in short bursts. And the challenge is finding those kind of exciting lessons that are going to be able to help him with that, to kind of generate that dopamine high. Unfortunately, as I said, one way that dopamine has affected our children is no longer good enough to want to please mom and dad. That dopamine doesn't give, that pleasure of pleasing mom and dad and hearing mom and dad say, well done, son, that's good. That doesn't give them that dopamine rush. And so they start turning to other more highly stimulating things. I would definitely start to limit video games, because video games gives them that false sense of security. In fact, video games almost rewards distractibility. Because if you're watching those kids on those video games, their eyes have to go all over the place. They have to be watching, they have to watch, and they have to, if they're playing this, and it's almost rewarding, because the more distractible he is, the better he's going to do at that game. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I would also recommend, like I said, exercise, the arts as well is so important. Being a good teacher isn't just about reading and writing and arithmetic. Sorry, Matthew C. But the arts is so important as well. Getting that young man interested in music or in drawing, that is more right brain kind of activities that's going to help them. When you increase that art activity on the right side of the brain, reading and writing, arithmetic, that's kind of, left brain. Am I doing left brain? But with the arts, you're kind of helping them to develop their right brain. So arts and music. In fact, when I do a workshop, Gretchen, you'd be happy to hear this. One of the things that I tell parents to do when they're teaching math is to infuse music. And I bring out the Matthew C. jingles that you've written, that you've put so many math facts to song. And I encourage parents to do that. In fact, parents, there's a lot of things on YouTube and resources out there on YouTube that ties music to learning facts, be it Bible verses or the books of the Bible or math or science or formulas. Using music to teach, very effective with your boys. So music, arts, all that kind of helps with that whole brain development that an ADHD child might need. So I'm saying cut down on TV, cut down on video games, cut down on computer time. Now I'm not saying cut it out because you would have a war for some parents, but perhaps make it so that for every minute of video time they want, they have to read for the same amount of time. So if they want to be on the video game for an hour, they're going to have to read for an hour, read a book for an hour. Creating more structure is key for the ADHD child, and not just the child with ADHD, but also any child with learning disability. In fact, boys need structure. You don't want to have what are we going to do today? Let me see, it's Monday. Oh, let's do this. Oh, no, we did that last Monday. No, you want to have a structured approach to your instruction. You want to have a schedule, a set schedule that we're going to do this at this time, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. The male brain needs structure. That's why men tend to gravitate towards the military, because it's a very structured environment. They're told when to march, when to eat, when to go out into the rifle range, very structured, and they need that, even more so than girls. So a structured environment. You have to also be careful of your instructional space. When I was a teacher, I loved bulletin boards. My mother was a teacher, and that was the fun part of the school year, going in August and September, helping my mom put up her beautiful bulletin boards. My mom is 97 now, still living and still with me. And that was our fun part. So when I had a classroom, oh my goodness, I had decorations here and posters there and everything except, no, I had something on the ceiling too. I was getting ready to say except on the ceiling, I had something on the ceiling. But with boys who are ADHD, or even girls who are ADHD and distractible, that can be a little harsh on them. So you need to just be aware of how much, you put around them to look. So you want to limit that. Lots.
One of the things that being attention deficit myself, married to a man who has attention deficit, our children had no chance of getting out of this gig without having some degree of attention deficit. So I do follow a lot of really cutting edge research. And for years and years, we were told that you should have your children do the tough things first. Whatever was the toughest subject for them would be the first thing that they should do. But I will tell you that there's been some research just in the last 2 to 3 years about attention deficit, that they found that if you collaborate with your child and you all decide what Dr. Greene says as far as a predetermined schedule looks like, so that they can choose how they begin to enter in, they're more likely to enter in and stay engaged in that schedule than us as parents making that predetermination before we begin that schedule. So I want to encourage you as parents, when you put that schedule together, whether they're 6, 7, 8 years old, allow them to collaborate with you. And Dr. Greene, we had this one question, and I think this is so important. This is a parent who says, what do I do with my 6-year-old who wants to ask off-topic questions or ramble on, wasting time when we have to do school? Now, I have a very practical piece of advice for her, but I'm going to ask you to answer that question first.
Sure. Oh boy, yeah. If I can keep in fact, I used to do that in my biology class. My biology teacher, when I was a student, was kind of absent-minded. And when he wanted to give us a quiz and we didn't want to take the quiz, we just brought up a question to just kind of get him off track, And then he would say, oh, I got to give you a test. Oh, there's no time. And we were like, darn it. But with that little fella, I would suggest, first of all, that you have him write down his question. Right? I want you to write down your question, John. And we're going to work on this for 10 minutes. And after that 10 minutes, then I'm going to answer your question. Oh, no, don't ask it out. Write it down, put it in our jar, and let's do this for 10 minutes or 5 minutes. And then we'll ask your question. Also, again, rewarding him with time. If he is able to do this in a certain amount of time, if he's able to finish, then he'll be able to have a break. He'll be able to go and play a video game for 5 minutes, or he'll be able to go outside and shoot the basketball. And putting him on that schedule and holding up a carrot saying, once we finish our schedule, I'll answer all your questions that you can.
And I think that's a terrific idea. So what's happening here is it's not that the question isn't going to be answered, it's when it's going to be answered. Right. Now, I have 2 pieces of advice for you guys for that. The first one was what I used in my homeschool, which I had the question goddess. That was my youngest daughter. We still call her that. She's 27 now. But at the beginning of every school day, I would hand her 5 poker chips. And every time she asked a question, she had to give me back a poker chip. When she was out of poker chips, she was out of questions until some later point in the day when I would give her more chips. So that's a very practical, quantifiable. Excellent. I'm holding 5 of them. And what that allows the student to do is look at, do I want to give up a chip to ask that question or not? Now, by the same token, how do you keep a child focused for a period of time? And my coworker that I told you I mailed Dr. Greene's book to has this wonderful idea. So what he does with his very attention deficit 6-year-old son is he says, Bud, I need 10 minutes of your attention. Here are 5 Duplos, and I'm going to put those 5 Duplos out in front of you. And every 2 minutes, I'm going to take one away. And so he has a visual way of quantifying time for that child so that child can stay engaged for that 10-minute period of time. And once he's taken away all 5 Duplos, then his son knows a break is coming. So that gives you guys a very quantifiable way to account for time without you being the bad guy. Because you know what? We don't want to be the bad guy, but I had the same thing with my Spanish teacher, and she probably missed about half of the quizzes she wanted to give us because she was easily distractible, and we would ask her a question and off she would go. And parents who were that way as well. So can we talk a little bit about the differences between attention deficit in a young boy and attention deficit in a teenager? Because I know they don't manifest themselves the same way.
What can happen, unfortunately, with some of our older children, to me, they're all children, that when they are not able to handle the distractibility that they had when they were younger, when they get older, it can really turn them off to school, lack of motivation, what it takes to motivate them becomes a lot harder. What the parent is faced with many times is, especially again with boys, and I like how Leonard Sachs called them boys adrift, just kind of undermotivated. You know, I don't want to do anything. I just want to sit here and play video games all day. And that again can be part of the chemical issues that that child might be having, in addition to the environment. How have the parents over the years had them or tried to instill some sense of responsibility in them? If that child has not been given a sense of responsibility, has not been told, you're part of this household, you know, you're not just here, you know, sucking air and eating food, you are part, there's jobs to do, there's chores to do. We expect you to be a contributing member of this household. If that child has not been doing that all along, then when he becomes 14, 15 years old, it's going to be hard to flip that switch. So a lot of that has to do with what's that child is able to get away with, so to speak, as a child when he gets older. But it is important because we are preparing our children to live without us. That's our job as parents. And when we have a 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old child who can't even do certain kinds of minimal self-help kinds of things, you know, it's a disaster. It's a recipe for disaster. You have some carrots, parents. Chances are that undermotivated teen, they're going to want a car one day, you know? So having the fact that, you know, unless you become a productive member of this family, unless you show and apply yourself to your schoolwork, you can forget driver's licenses. You can forget the independence that comes with that. So hopefully parents will be able to get them while they're young and train them up in the way they should go. Gretchen, what are some of your ideas?
Well, I laugh because you said that, you know, about motivating kids. And I remember my my now 32-year-old son, when he was 12, he said, I don't want to do school anymore. I don't want to have anything to do with school. I'm going to work a manual job, and I don't need a bunch of academics to do that. So in a very brief description, my husband decided that what we would do is we would give him a taste of what it was to work a manual job. And so we ordered 4 yards of mulch, And we told him he would work from 8 to 5 with a 15-minute break in the morning and a 15-minute break in the afternoon and a half an hour lunch. And the very first day, it was like it is here in North Carolina, not a cloud in the sky. And he thought this was great. Now, his 3 sisters were a tad bit annoyed with us for this particular endeavor. But the next day, the heavens opened and, we were expecting to see an ark float down our front yard at any moment. And he stood at the front window and said, well, I guess I can't work today. And my husband said, oh, no, if you work a manual job, the weather doesn't affect you. And by the end of that second day, that child had mulch where God did not intend mulch to be. And he came in and he said, okay, I get it. I don't want to do this anymore. And my husband said, there's 4 yards of mulch out there that you're going to have to move. And so it was a very long 8 days before he got all that mulch put down, but it was also an extraordinarily effective object lesson for an inattentive child to be able to figure out the difference between, academics yield something different than non-academics. So I encourage parents to think creatively in that particular way.
Absolutely. My son, when he came home from college for breaks, and I said, no, you can't just lay around here for 2 and 3 weeks. You need to go volunteer someplace or get a job. And it was at Christmas time, so UPS was always hiring. And so he was there, UPS, and he was on the midnight shift, loading trucks. And I wanted him, like you said, Gretchen, I wanted him to see this is the kind of job you have when you're not finishing college, when you're not getting a college education, your options are limited. Not that work, was wrong. In fact, I admire our UPS drivers. They saved us during the pandemic. But I wanted him to see that if you want the kind of job that will allow you to be in air conditioning all day and wear nice clothes, then you're going to have to work hard for that. And that means academics.
Right. So I have a good question here from Mark. He says, how do you decide whether to medicate or not? And I think that there's a lot of parents who are weighing that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Oof, that is hard. And I say that it's hard because when you've heard from the school, and I was there, I can remember sitting in those meetings with parents, sitting around the table, and you had all the specialists, the special ed, and the psychologists all around the table, looking at these poor parents and saying, perhaps you need to get your child evaluated, have your pediatrician check him out. Sometimes when you do that, pediatricians say, all right, he's distractible. Yes. He's not able to focus. Yes. So he asked those questions and, that describes your son. Sometimes doctors, unfortunately, will say, well, let's try him on this medication. Instead of looking at some of the other things that I mentioned earlier, let's look at his diet. Let's look at, is he getting exercise? Is he getting too much overstimulation with video games and computer games and this kind of thing? And sometimes our doctors take kind of the easy way out. And we have grown up in a society where we're ready to fix anything with a pill. Give me a pill to fix him, to make him better. But we have minimal, and I'm talking about minimal compared to the research that we might have on the effects of aspirin on someone. We have minimal research on the long-term effects of these really powerful drugs on a young developing brain. And so many times too, we are pigeonholing these young men and young women into certain careers that they will never be able to do. Who's going to give a gun to somebody who needs Adderall to control the way that they act, so they could join the military? Who's going to give a gun to somebody to join the police force if they need Ritalin to be able to focus? Who's going to give a security clearance to someone who needs medication in order to control their behavior? So, we are really limiting the options of our children when we run quickly to these medications. So with an abundance of caution, oh my goodness, yes. Look at so many other things, like I was talking about earlier, the diet, the exercise, and the amount of stimulation that it's been inhibiting that dopamine function.
I think
And
it's also
again,
important to bring up that, I mentioned the fact that your child has an attention span of their age plus 2 to 3 minutes. And I laughingly say, very truthfully, when I speak at conferences, unless they're in puberty, and then you need to subtract those 2 to 3 minutes because we fail to recognize what the hormones of puberty do to that developing brain.
yes,
And so, as a parent, there's a difference between giving grace to a child who just has a short attention span and holding them accountable to allowing a child to be able to have more self control. And you know what, folks? Self control is not something that just manifests itself.
has
It's
to be
something
taught.
that has to be learned. So, Dr. Greene, can you talk a little bit about how the boys in your school, how you taught them to generate some of that self control?
First off, we had to, again, like I said, we had that schedule. And we told them, we're going to do this activity from this time to this time. Hang in there, guys. I know you can hang on, and then we're going to give you a break. And at our school, and our boys loved it, we gave brain breaks throughout the day. We didn't require them to sit still for any length of time. Even when they were taking a test, I used to tell the boys that if you get to the point in the test and you've been working on that test for 5-10 minutes, I want you to stand up and do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups. Even when we did standardized testing, when the tests weren't being timed, we were able to do that even more. That got one of my little boys in trouble when he transferred to a regular school. I got a call from his mother that his teacher had called her and said, Michael was taking a test, and all of a sudden he got up and started doing push-ups. And so his mother had to laugh. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But he went to an all-boys school where they encourage that. Frequent brain breaks. Don't keep your little boys doing one activity for much more than, as Gretchen said, 10, 15 minutes, and based upon their age. When they're older, they can go a little bit longer, but don't. Give them time for recess, and don't punish them by saying, well, because you didn't do your work, you're not going to go outside. Oh, no, you will be punishing yourself because they're going to have their recess. They'll just have recess at their desk or at your kitchen table. So give them exercise, give them a lot of water. Hydration is an important part as well when you're trying to keep that child focused. So breaks, exercise, hydration, limit the amount that you're expecting from them. Break it up into small chunks. Don't try to talk them to death. Don't turn on a video and say, watch this video for 30 minutes. No, come back every once in a while, hit the pause button, let them get up and stretch. Come back, hit the pause, the start button again. So there's all kind of creative ways that you can do when you're home and you're dealing not with 30 kids, but really some of this you can do when you have 30 kids in a class, but you definitely can do it when you have a few at your homeschool table.
I think one of the things that parents often say is that they are struggling with independent work. And I would like to hear your opinions on at what point do we get, because I have an opinion here, but I'm going to keep my opinion to myself for the moment and ask you, at what point should a parent be able to expect some independent work from a boy?
It's going to depend on that boy. There are some little boys who you say, honey, I want you to sit down and do this assignment and then bring it up to me when you're finished. And he's going to be on point. He's going to be focused on that, especially if it's a subject that he likes, that he enjoys, that he finds interesting. On the other hand, we have some little boys who, independence isn't really, part of their vocabulary, especially at the younger grades. My daughter homeschools, and she will sit there and she's using a program where it's video based, where the teacher is on the video. So she'll sit there with her son and right by him. And occasionally I will call, I'll forget that they're in school. I don't know why. I'll call her and say, oh, I'm sorry, you're in school. She says, well, that's okay. She's out. Zachary and I are just watching the video. So she'll talk to me and she'll say, okay, Mom, well, wait a minute, Zachary, where did you come back here? You know, the phone rings and he's gone. So it's going to depend on the child. Just know your son. That is so key. Bond with your son. Know his likes and dislikes, know his strengths and his weaknesses. But no matter what it is, the way he learns is different. It's not wrong. It's not bad. That's a message that a lot of our boys get in schools, that, you know, they are different, but they are bad and they are wrong, and there's something wrong with them. So just say, hey, that's just the way he learns, and that, you know, God has a special plan and purpose for his life, and he's going to achieve it, whether he's able to sit down there for 30 minutes or an hour or for 5 minutes. Just don't give up.
And I think that probably is the singular most important piece of advice, is it's up to us not to give up on our children, because they all mature and grow differently. Mm-hmm. My eldest son, God bless him, he didn't have the H of the ADHD, but he definitely had ADD. And there were many periods of time where I felt like I was homeschooling Mr. Magoo, because he was just not fully present there. And I have to tell you all, he was probably approaching his 16th birthday before I could leave him for a single math problem without sitting right there next to him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, my youngest son, he's my bonus kid. He showed up when I was 46, and he was the one who said to me in 4th grade, how about you just give me a list and I'll find you if I need you.
Oh.
But I promise you, I had to have 5 that needed my attention until they were middle school to high school before I got that child. And then when puberty hit with him, that whole world changed, because the hormones of puberty are really doing a number on his brain, and his attention deficit has manifested itself not in elementary school, not in middle school, but in high school. It has been huge. So the reason I tell you these things, parents, is because you're the best student of your child. Mm-hmm. Become the most ardent observer of that student so that you can figure out what the combination lock is to help them be successful. I love this question. And Dr. Greene, I don't know how you will answer it, but being a lefty, the question is, can you address issues of teaching a left-handed child, especially boys? So can you address that a little bit? Because my husband and I are both left-handed, and out of our 6 kids, we only got 2. So,
what I found, what I found the biggest problem for me, rather than for them, is when it came to handwriting. When I had my school, we taught our boys cursive handwriting right from kindergarten. Cursive handwriting with the looping, works so much better with our boys. And after a few years, in cursive, they had beautiful handwriting. And part of learning, teaching a child cursive, that you're guiding their hand. So I had this left-handed child that I'm trying to maneuver his hand. And I just say, honey, I'm so sorry. You try it with your left hand and I will try it. Try to guide your pencil. I couldn't guide his hand. I could kind of guide his pencil. That became the biggest part. But there are becoming more and more products out there for lefties. Left-handed scissors, left-handed pencils, the windy pencil sharpeners even, because people recognize that not everybody is right-handed. If he is left-handed, I don't think it happens so much now, but back in the day, if your child was left-handed, parents struggled and made that child right-handed. In fact, my dad said that he would have been left-handed, but back in the 20s and 30s growing up, that wasn't allowed. And what that can do, that messes really with the brain. It can cause stuttering, all kind of brain dysfunction when you try to force a child to be something that they're not naturally going. What are some of your ideas, Gretchen?
Well, here's a picture that I want to show to parents, because when you have a young child, let me see if I can do this without reflection. This is a 6-year-old's hand. This is an adult hand. Can you see the difference? The bones are not even connected in their hands. And very often as parents, we have an expectation that a student will produce handwriting as an older child would when they don't even have an effective pencil grasp. So for lefties, I want to give you all a pencil grasp that works really, really well. And I want you to have them take their left hand and put the pencil between their first and second fingers. And then when they grasp the pencil, they can put an equivalent amount of weight on all 3 fingers. And it's much easier, lefty or righty, to learn to hold a pencil that way. And Dr. Greene also mentioned about cursive handwriting. If you have a child who's dyslexic, cursive handwriting is the way to go, because 2 things. Every time you have to pick up a pencil, you raise the neurological load. And if you can keep that pencil on the paper, it makes it easier. Plus the fact when you write cursively, you can't flip letters.
You don't.
Because letters flow the proper way.
Mm-hmm.
So Sharon has asked an interesting question. She says, I have 2 lefties and I'm more curious about their learning styles being different. Have you noticed this? And if so, how can we help them best?
Their learning style, learning differences, being, okay, you're talking about like auditory learner, kinesthetic learner, visual learning, that kind of thing. I haven't seen a correlation. I don't know about you, Gretchen. I haven't seen a correlation that, left-handed people tend to be visual learners or right-handed people tend to be, auditory learners. I've never seen any research about that. Have you?
No, I have not. But I think that there's one thing that's really important. In the early 90s, when I started homeschooling, learning preferences or learning styles were huge in the homeschooling community.
Mm-hmm.
And we as parents were exhausting ourselves trying to meet each kid's learning style. You do have a learning preference. Each of us has a preference for learning a particular way, but we bring all of the senses to the table whenever we learn. So I think it's important as parents that we can speak to those learning preferences, but we also have to balance that carefully. And here's a terrific observation. Christy has said her little boy is a morning person, and she's learned that she needs to get his lessons done or she's lost him by lunch. And I think that's a really tiny piece of wisdom that's huge for parents, because in the observing of your children, being that most ardent observer, you're going to figure out where are they on and where are they not on. And
that is so true. That is so true. And it may change when they become teenagers. That might shift. In fact, a number of researchers have said that high schools really start too early. That, public high school, when you have to have kids starting school at 7:30 in the morning, that, that's not really good. That high schools ideally should start maybe about 9. Frankly, if anyone asks me to be able to speak coherently and learn anything before 10 o'clock in the morning, they're going to be sadly disappointed, because I'm a night person. I will be up until midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, in the morning, doing what I couldn't do in the, earlier in the day. So you're exactly right, Gretchen. Knowing your child, because you may have, instead of a morning glory, you might have a night owl, and you might find that it's better to do your instruction like maybe from 11 to 6 or 11 to 4. So knowing your child, that's the beauty of homeschooling. You can do it. The only problem comes if you've got one of each. You've got a morning glory, you've got a night owl. Finding that happy medium.
And we had all of those here. I am the morning glory and I married the night owl. I don't know why God puts those 2 people together, but I wake up and I've got 30 thoughts, and you're going to get them all in the first 5 minutes. And my husband does not want anybody to say a word to him until he's had at least 2 cups of coffee. Your children are one of those 2 people. And whatever exasperates you the most is probably what your children are. So it's really important for us to be able to figure out how to help our kids succeed. Here's a good question, I think, Dr. Greene, that is probably the best. Actually, I'm going to combine two questions because they're a little bit tangentially connected. How do we help our boys become curious learners rather than just enough to get by learners? And in conjunction with that, how do we set our boys up for success so that they don't become that just enough to get by as they leave our tutelage and step out into the world, into the college world?
A big part of that is knowing the interests of your son. Hopefully that you have enough experiences in his life experiences, activities, be it field trips or books or whatever, that you are waiting to see that spark. What is it that really piques his interest? I said earlier that God has a special plan and purpose for every boy, every child, every girl. And just trying to find that will ignite that lamp, that fire within them. A big part of it too is making sure that he's prepared for whatever that is. So if he has a bent towards trains, he's going to need to know some of the physics involved in making a train go, be it steam, be it electricity. He's going to need to be able to write well, definitely learn to read well. So I think a lot of that is equipping him with what he needs to be able to achieve. But learning those interests, I believe there are certain surveys out there as well, where you can, interest surveys, I guess they're called, where you can actually see just what kinds of things the child is interested in. Surround him with different books, magazines, whatever. So that's going to be the biggest project for any parent, is just trying to find out just where your child's interests lie. Some more ideas, Gretchen.
Well, I think this is an idea that was given to me by a homeschool mom from an event that I attended just about a month and a half ago. And it was absolutely, I have not stopped thinking about it. She said she had a child who was approaching the end of high school and couldn't quite figure out what she wanted to do in college. So what they did is they found half a dozen trusted adults who knew her daughter. And they went to them and they said, tell us what you see as her strengths.
It's good.
That is brilliant. And as parents, if you're not surrounding your kids, particularly your boys, with trusted adults who can influence them, then perhaps that should be a homework assignment for you. Because
Absolutely.
those adults will see things in those boys that you do not. That is getting tremendous benefit.
Yes. And getting volunteer opportunities as well. Volunteering in a number of different places. I wanted to be a doctor all through high school. I wanted to be a doctor. And so when I enrolled in the pre-med program in college, a friend of mine who's also in pre-med said, Vermelle, why don't we go to the local hospital and volunteer? And I said, oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, we'll get to see where we'll work one day. And it took me a very short time to realize that that is not where I wanted to spend my adult career, working in the hospital, being around sick people and the smells. And so in my case, it really helped me to open my eyes. So parents allowing different things to help them to volunteer, be at the library or be at the hospital, be at the veterinarians, be it at the local construction site, if they're able to do that, if they're old enough, but giving them opportunities to volunteer, volunteering at the flower shop, volunteering in schools, perhaps, they might think about being a teacher. So there's so many other things, but they need to volunteer their time in order to get a little taste of the kinds of options that are out there.
I think that is really a true statement. And I know that with my eldest son, he did a year with AmeriCorps. And that was
Excellent.
tremendously motivating for him because at the end of that year, he had a small sum of money towards college. He started his own business and he paid his own way through college in 3 years. And
Wow.
this was the child that I couldn't get to do a single math problem by himself at 16. So hang in there, parents. It does come to you. Now, there's two parents who have asked questions that I think are important. So we're going to go a little bit over because these questions were, I think, things that we need to address. The first one says, what do we do with little boys who are 2 to 5 years old who scream and yell and throw themselves on the floor when things don't go their way? And I have an opinion there, but I'm going to leave that to you to answer, Dr. Greene.
I'm kind of old school when it comes to that. First of all, the battle shouldn't start when they're 5. It should start when they're 2, when they're 1. But if the battle wasn't won at that point, wasn't won like WON by the parent at that age, then when they come to get to the 5-year-olds, well, the worst thing you can do is give them what they want. The worst thing that you can do is reward them for their bad behavior. If you have a spot in your room where they can flail about, in fact, if I were you, I would give them, I said, I'll give you 10 minutes to scream and yell in that room. But after 10 minutes, it's going to stop, or mom's going to have to come in. I just got back from a homeschool conference where I saw Gretchen too. And in the hotel, there was this mom and her son was probably about 3 or 4. She told him, I counted, I said that, I'm going to count. She told him at least 12 times to come with her and sit down. And he went that way, come over here and sit down. He went there, come over here and sit down. And see, with my children, I would tell them, I'll tell you once. Sometimes I may even say it a second time because you just may not have heard me. But after that, I'm coming for you. So parents, it may be a hard lesson to learn if you didn't do it earlier, but you got to win that battle now, because that 5-year-old screaming and rolling around on the floor is going to become a 15-year-old who has you screaming and rolling around on the floor, from the frustration.
I think that's an important point. So I have 2 observations I'd like to make to you all from a very practical perspective. A couple of those kids were my kids. And here's one of the things that you can do. What happens is when we trip into temper tantrum land, all of our senses are on hyper alert. Everything, our ears, our eyes, what we're saying, what's happening with our brain is though it's on fire. And one of the ways that you can interrupt that process as a parent is to get down and very quietly say, hey, I want you to touch your nose. I want you to hold both your ears. I want you to put your hands on your shoulders. What you're doing is you're stopping that runaway emotional response. Now, tangentially with that, often we see that kind of emotional response with a child who is a perfectionist. And I want to speak a little bit about perfectionism because I'm a recovering one. And perfectionists are not born, they are made. And we as parents need to model a lack of perfectionism. We need to give ourselves grace when we make mistakes. We need to make light of mistakes when they're made. And if you have a child who has those perfectionistic tendencies, I would encourage you to be the ardent observer and see how you can walk that back, because it's easier to walk it back with a 5-year-old than it is to walk it back with a 15-year-old, just like Dr. Greene has said. The other thing that I want to say is that's very important. As Demme's special needs consultant for 7 years, I often have conversations with parents, and Dr. Greene has talked to you about the immediacy of the dopamine hit from you playing video games. Unfortunately, we live in a society where these things are prevalent. Mm-hmm. And here's what we're seeing with more and more frequency. When we have a child who begins to work in the digital world before they have developed their central detail vision, it creates that kind of hair trigger response. And the challenge is, what we don't realize is that it's something they can't interrupt because their vision is betraying them. We also live in a society where dyslexia has become a juggernaut of financial compensation. And more parents, WebMD, right, wrong, or indifferent, have gone and read the list of dyslexia symptoms and said, oh, I think my child has dyslexia. I have 2 kids who have a diagnosis, and dyslexia, at its medical definition, when it was first attended to, was that it was an auditory processing disorder. But one of the things that you as a parent need to rule out if you have a child who appears to have dyslexic tendencies is you need to make sure that vision is not a mitigating factor for them. What do I mean by that? I'm not talking about whether your student can see 20/20. I'm talking about whether your student's eyes work together the way they're supposed to. And this can manifest itself as a hair trigger temper. It can manifest itself as attention deficit. It can manifest itself as a student who's obedient at the beginning of the day, and the longer the day lasts, the less obedient they become. If those describe a child in your household, I want to encourage you to go find in your community a developmental optometrist and have your student evaluated. This is not just a general optometric exam. This is looking specifically at the muscles of the eyes and whether they work together, because frankly, if there's a challenge, your student doesn't even know that there's a challenge and they can't describe it accurately. So I wanted to make sure, some of you have had comments about, what do I do about that crazy, wild attention deficit behavior? And sometimes it's not attention deficit. Sometimes it's an undiagnosed vision issue. And so I wanted to make sure that we didn't conclude today without sharing that. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are past the time, and I could sit here all day because Dr. Greene is so full of tremendous wisdom. I will leave the closing comments to her this afternoon. And let me just say at the outset, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so grateful to have had your wisdom for the last hour.
Oh, this has been a joy, truly a joy, Gretchen. And I thank the Lord for you and for Demme Learning and for these webinars and for those homeschool parents. And I tell you, as a veteran of public education, I don't want to make it too much of an exaggeration, but there isn't possibly anything you could do that would make it worse than what that you could get at or that your child could get in public school education. And let me clean that up a little. I'm saying this because with you, they're getting a teacher who is on point, who is focused on that child's needs, especially that little boy's needs. He has someone who loves him, who cares for him and provides for him, who's going to look at the best that they can give him. Unfortunately, my colleagues in public education, your child would be one of 25 or one of 30, and they just can't. So parents, if God has given you the opportunity to homeschool your child, and you are doing this in order to bring them up in the way that they should go, He's going to equip you with ideas, wisdom, resources to be able to help you to succeed. You're not alone out there. The issues that you might be having with your son, other people have had. Talk, make sure you get into a homeschool co-op or homeschool group where you can talk with other like-minded parents and share ideas. You're not an island. Don't be an island. Share ideas, come to these conferences, contact resources and organizations like Demme Learning, and there are others out there who can come along beside you and help you to succeed, because truly you are your son's best chance for success. And I wish you success, and I send you my prayers.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Gretchen.